Welcome to the Love in the Night Paranormal Readathon reading vlog. As of recording, it is officially Tuesday, October the 8th. The Love in the Night Paranormal Readathon started yesterday. Willow! Willow! I wasn't able to record yesterday, but I was able to read, and I am about 94 or 96% done with Dark City Omega by Elizabeth Stevens as my first book of the readathon. Now, I don't know if I'd qualify Dark City Omega as paranormal because it seems to be more like a high fantasy location. I've had this book on my TBR for almost a year at this point, but I keep hesitating to pick it up, partially because the summary makes it sound like the alpha omega element is a little bit darker than I like. The relationship itself at this juncture is very distasteful to me. They had a brief moment, I think somewhere in the 20 to 50% mark, where I thought they were gonna salvage things, and where we are now, things are not okay. I'm not going to read the second in the series, although I'm close enough at this point, I'm probably gonna finish this first one. I do think the world building is pretty good. My major issues are gonna come from the male love interest, but also like this whole like lack of confidence that seems like both the protagonist and the love interest have going on. They keep like repeating this mantra of like unworthy, 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 like both of them internally for various separate reasons. And I think I'm just out of the phase in my life where that kind of struggle is appealing to me. But specifically with the male love interest, I understand that he had a traumatic incident in his childhood and he feels like he should have saved someone and couldn't. And that's why he's like now unworthy of anything. But here's the dealio. You turned into not just like an alpha, but this thing they have in this universe called a berserker, which is like a step above an alpha. You overthrew the berserker of another city and are now the ruler of that city. If you're in this paradigm where might makes right, alphas take what they want, either through killing other alphas and or berserkers, or through hunting down omegas, overpowering them, and then just keeping them using like their voice itself as a command that can keep them doing their will, then you're at the top, baby. You've earned everything there is to earn, at least through this system, which means you're no longer unworthy. Now, if you think the system is corrupt or messed up or unfair, then we have a different scenario going on. But at that point in time, you would be trying to change it, and you wouldn't be surprised when your like new Omega partner expresses a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of unfairness, and a lot of judgment, I guess, to you and how you rule things when you allow these things to continue in your city unchecked or changed. I guess I just didn't relate to his insecurities or agree with how he responded to having those insecurities. There's this key portion where he has the choice to do the right thing or the wrong thing, and he chooses to go back on his promises to our main protagonist, chain her up, and basically leave her locked up on a bed all by herself for who knows how long. To me, there's no coming back from that. There's a bunch of other factors around it that make her being locked up stuck on a bed worse. And the plot kind of tries to like contrive it so that she has to forgive him or the whole world will collapse. And she does what I think is actually a pretty smart thing. And she says, okay,
this guy said I had to forgive you so that we had a chance to win, so I forgive you, but I don't love or trust you.
And if we had stuck with that thread with her being like resistant to him and rebuffing him, maybe eventually there could have been a world where he like earned that trust back, or he came to a realization about what had caused his original snap and he made changes for the better. But honestly, we just are not there right now, and they go right away back to being very intimate. I think it's supposed to be like an alpha omega, they can't help it kind of thing. And also we have gone into like this epic quest mode where the fates are these very powerful omegas who are kind of like trying to take control over the entirety of the land, and there's like these opposing opposite omegas out there in the wild called the Fallen, whose powers match the fates' powers, and by combining them all together they should be able to take on the fates and like reorganize the world in a better way, maybe. And we have no idea where to look, if they're even alive right now, all of that kind of stuff. So that feels very like, well, what are they going to do in the next book? How are they going to make this come about? And the whole time it's just going to be interspersed with a lot of smut. This is sort of a slow burn to get to the smut, but once you're in it, there's a lot of smutty scenes, like one after the other after the other. And for me, that was a little bit jarring. Alpha Omega stories usually have a lot of smut in them, so that part was sort of to be expected. But when we went so long without having any steamy scenes, and then suddenly there was like automatic chemistry and we couldn't stop with the steaminess, mixed pacing didn't work for me very well. We're at the climactic scene of Dark City Omega, where the main love interest was following who he thought was the protagonist, but turns out to be like her fake doppelganger. And they've captured him and are sort of starting to torture him. And it looks like his found family, he calls the Six, and the protagonist and the other Omega that's part of this Fallen 4 trope, have found them, and there's going to be some kind of big battle with some kind of conclusion. Okay, so I officially finished Dark City Omega. I'm really not okay with the fact the protagonist and the love interest end up getting married. And the use of the love interest's sister as like actually secretly alive and maybe held captive by the Fates, maybe willingly working for them, is kind of a crap twist. If I were going to compare it to other Alpha Omegaverse stories, I'd say the world building, the overall plot, better than most of them. 3.5, 4 stars. If we're going to talk about the romance, that's a 2 to a 1 star. I like our protagonist mostly. Some of the changes in her attitude and thought process is overly abrupt. I don't think we spent enough time really establishing what it means to be an alpha or an omega, what those characteristics were like, and how our protagonist and love interest either adhere to them or are like constrained by them versus how they're able to be different than that stereotype. I have to think about it a little bit because even though I don't want to read the next in this series, I think this might be a 3.5 star read overall with a couple of trigger warnings thrown in for good measure. The protagonist is just a little bit too naive, a little too trusting, and a little too like overall hopeful. It's one thing when she first enters the city and becomes a quote-unquote Dark City Omega for her to like trust that the love interest is going to treat her well, treat her as much like an equal as he can, while he continues to change things so he can treat her more equally. When he says that everyone will obey her commands and listen to her and protect her, it's like one thing to believe that on the onset. It's another thing to continue to want to live around those people and trust them after what I would say is like a mass betrayal, because when he locks her up in that room, she doesn't have like appropriate clothing, so she's cold and shivery. No one gives her any warm blankets or clothing or anything to make her comfortable. No one spends any time around her. No one will listen to her and what she thinks or feels. So all of those people are also betraying her and choosing him over her, which I suppose is to be expected if the two of them have a fight, but it lets her know that they are willing to do her harm or to stand by and watch while she is harmed. And honestly, that's pretty in line with how this like city treated her when she first walked into it too. Like both he and her came into the Dark City together, but they were passed out. While he was unconscious and healing from like some fighting that had gone on, she was treated pretty badly then too. If I had been her, that would have been like a clarifying and reinforcing moment, letting me know that my assumptions about being an Omega in the city were correct, and that I wasn't gonna have freedom or agency, and I wasn't gonna be able to trust other people to be like looking out for me, protecting me, or even caring about me to any significant degree. Which means I have to put all of my faith in my partner's goodwill and their maintaining relationships for me. And if that's the case, this betrayal becomes a lot scarier, and I just don't see myself ever going back and putting myself in that situation. And like where this character originally was doing everything she could to avoid becoming an Alpha's Omega and to maintain her freedom and agency, I just don't see a world where she puts her safety, her freedom, her agency on the line like this for quote-unquote love. Time for me to move on to the Love in the Night group reading book, One Night, One Bite by Dria Anderson. This is going to be the second book I've read by Dria Anderson. The first one was a Lion Shifter book recommended to me by Heather over at Hia Booktubes. And coincidentally, this One Night, One Bite is also a recommendation from Heather over at Hia Booktubes. I liked the Lion Shifter story well enough, except the love interest had like a specific line that I found very triggering, and after that I couldn't get on board with him or the relationship. That was definitely a very specific me issue though, so we'll see how this one goes. The first line here, Raven took an attentive sip of the strong drink in her cup. Birthday or not, she had no business being out. Add to that, it was Valentine's Day. This was a day for couples. Agree to disagree. Valentine's Day is for everyone and for all kinds of love. The next important line to me is Raven couldn't distinguish who was a vampire or just one of the many supernaturals that had taken over the southern United States. I love when there's supernatural species mixed in with humans, and I love when it's just like an acknowledged thing. Also a little relief because I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about like this recently divorced woman getting picked up by a vampire if she didn't realize that they were a vampire. But now that it seems like that's going to be known from the jump and she's going to know what that means, I'm more on board. I'm about 22% through with this story. We're here with the two of them together. We got a little bit from his perspective and found out that this woman is his mate and that he believes she has some kind of power, and we know that she thinks she's human, so that's kind of an interesting dynamic just from the start. I'll be very curious to see how that plays out. But she has just gotten out of a divorce, and I don't know necessarily that she's ready to move on into something else. Obviously, she didn't come out here tonight with the plan of that happening. He had business to attend to, but they let him go early so he can take care of his mate because he's distracted. And when he gets back to her, they have their first real conversation. Did you come here to experience a bite once? Or did you come hunting for someone to submit to? She shivered. I didn't think that far ahead. He chuckled against her skin. He didn't quite like that answer. The thought of another person tasting her filled him with possessive anger. His hand traced the front of her throat, and he raked his teeth down her back. Regardless, ain't nobody in here tasting you now that I've found you. She smirked. What if I haven't decided yet? He growled and pulled her back against his erection. I done made the decision for you, shawty. I hate when they say, I made the decision for you, we're doing my thing now, I don't care about you. This could turn out to be like some kind of consensual non-consent. It just sends chills down my spine and makes me think like run in the opposite direction now. Small update. We're in chapter 3 with Raven's POV, and it looks like maybe she knows that she is supernatural something or other. We just haven't experienced what that is and how it makes her different than a human yet. Man is walking red flags. I guess he's better than the ex-partner Damien. Even though he protected her from this, the fact that he's like possessive and aggressive and feisty about the ex, I've never felt this way about a significant other's ex-partner. There's always going to be a partner who came before you. Lead female protagonist is 35. Obviously they've dated a couple of times. She's divorced, so she had a whole ass husband. I don't know why that would make you feel insecure, possessive, jealous. And one thing that these like paranormal romances do is they use the quote-unquote mate bond as like an excuse. It has some kind of primal force over them, and that's what's causing the jealousy or possessiveness, and that somehow makes it excusable or hot or cute. So Vampire Guy's on strike number 2 for me, and I don't know that he spent even an hour with this girl yet. I'm at 44%, about halfway through. We've had our club scene. I do think Dria Anderson is a good author. I enjoy her writing style. I'd prefer if she just had the protagonist perspective, because I like the woman and I like her feelings and emotions and that she's into whatever's going on. Some of the stuff I'm not liking about the male love interest I wouldn't be getting if we weren't listening directly to his thoughts in his head. And generally that's something I think authors could learn from, is adding the male's perspective, or what they perceive as the male love interest perspective, often drags the book down like a star or 2. 66% in. Apparently the two of them mate the same night they meet, which I guess fine for a short novella. But this mating means that she has to become part of the vampire coven, so the vampire king has to drink part of her blood and she has to drink some of his. he is like creating such a scene and so worked up about it that now the king is going to have to do it without any pheromones or anything, which means that it's going to be very painful. In like wanting to protect his mate and keep her all to himself, he's actually causing her pain. That kind of proves to me that there are parts of the relationship that are toxic as all hell. So even though she's happy and like having a good time and bopping with it, and I want to be happy for her or whatever and just enjoy the romance, part of my head is like, why did you write it like this? Like, this totally could have just been a cozy with no stakes. So the two of them end up being together all weekend, and on Monday she insists she goes back to like her home and her job. A thing that this guy acknowledged he knew was gonna happen. And he acknowledged that he knew she needed some space even though they were new mates, that she was gonna live in her own place, that she was gonna spend some time sorting her life out and figuring out who she was. But then they get there and he goes crazy about the lack of security. And on one side, I kind of get it if there's actually some turf warfare going on between the supernaturals, which it appears there is. But on the other side, I do not like that her wanting to continue to live her life, which is a thing he agreed to, is now suddenly a problem and he's gonna like force her to move. She wanted to explore being on her own a bit. Did that make her a bad person? Even Sebastian didn't seem to think so. So she took comfort in that. There only seemed to be 1 or 2 points he wouldn't budge on, which was her security. It was reasonable, despite her pettiness making it seem like it wasn't. She isn't being petty. Like, the fact that she's frustrated by this situation is not a petty or small thing. Even if he's doing these things for her quote-unquote safety, he is being controlling, acting in ways that were not anticipated, and it seems like something they should be negotiating a little bit more than they are. And like her feelings of wanting to be free and live her own life and stay in her own place, and how his business is messing that up, should be validated a little bit more than they are right now. Y'all, I'm about 90% done with this story and I'm having kind of a hard time finding it very romantic. After this new dude decides he's gonna move his girl out of his best friend's place, he takes her to work, an assassination attempt happens, which I guess justifies his need for security, but also just like re-emphasizes how much she's risking and giving up. And we haven't even dealt with that. And her dad and her ex-husband are waiting for her. Because she mated this guy, her dad excommunicates her from the family. I know she had a strained relationship with her family and she found them controlling or whatever, so that led us to believe that it wasn't like all peaches and cream. We didn't get enough establishing that she needed a new family, and there certainly haven't been enough found family vibes here where she's like connecting with the vampires or whatever for me to feel like this is secure or good for her. I wanted a happily ever after, and I feel like she is at the lowest place in her life just based off of all the things happening right now. And I've just finished One Night, One Bite by Dria Anderson. I guess I'm happy she's happy. Couldn't be me. I did superficially notice a lot of similarities between this one and the Lion Shifter romance I read by Dria Anderson last year. The female character gets bossed around by her well-off family. They want to do some kind of arranged marriage with Lion Shifter girl, and with this girl she did do an arranged marriage that ended in divorce. There's mating, there's like this alpha man who for me is way too controlling and alpha, but I think a lot of people would find romantic. There's this fantasy about a woman who's free and independent and able to work, specifically pursuing her passion for charity or taking care of people. And then having a powerful man who is doing dangerous work that puts her in danger, but he keeps her safe from the danger at the same time, and also lets her live a lavish lifestyle. So I guess I can see where like just the two of us and like this intimate little bubble of luxury and wealth might appeal to some people. It doesn't particularly appeal to me, especially when paired with these very controlling love interests. But but I think it's pretty well constructed story-wise. I think Dria Anderson's a decent writer, and for that alone, I'd probably end up giving this 3.5 stars. Which rolls me into the next book I'm going to read for this readathon, which is Cold Hearted by Heather Guerre. I know literally nothing about this book or this author, only that Heather over at Hia Booktubes had it on her recommended list for this readathon, and she compared it to Kate C. Wells' The Rejected Mate series, and I think that's probably one of the best rejected werewolf series you can read on the market right now. Can't wait for the next in that installment. So I'm 5% in. I'm intrigued by Grace's general demeanor. She seems to be suffering with some kind of depression or loss. I'm also really excited about the setting. Alaska seems like such a fun place to set a werewolf shifter story. But mostly I'm confused about the deal with her room that she's renting. Is this an apartment? Is this a hotel? Is this an inn? And how would any of them have the right to tell her no overnight guests? Hey guys, who are you looking for? What's going on? Hi, Willow. Okay. As of recording, this is October 9th. We are officially halfway through The Love in the Night. And I wish I were reading right now, but unfortunately I have a couple chores I have to do before I can get back to it. As I was editing last night, I felt like I had left some things out. First thing first, I did not hate Dark City Omega, and I feel like it comes across as if I did in my vlogging. In fact, I think Dark City Omega in a lot of ways is a lot better than Rebecca Yarros' Fourth Wing, which probably feels like a bold statement to make because I rated Fourth Wing 4 stars, and I'm definitely only going to give Dark City Omega 3 stars, but hear me out. What Fourth Wing has going for it is dragons, and it also has like a weak character going through a training montage to become a badass character, and I love like the night school war college kind of feel going on. The main character in Dark City Omega is probably a better person overall. Like the starting point for the Dark City Omega protagonist, where she had found out she was an Omega, she'd been kicked out from like her friend group and was like wandering around trying to survive and avoid alphas, feels like a significantly more desperate state for her to be in, and she was willing to go heavy metal all the way to avoid that fate, which to a certain degree I find really admirable. And the fact that even when she's not successful in avoiding that kind of fate, she still continues to struggle against not just an alpha, but like a berserker, who again is the next level of alpha, feels like empowering, especially because to a certain degree I feel like she's a little bit successful in that. Meanwhile, Violet always feels pretty helpless, going into the war college not because she wants to, but because her mom told her to. If anything, instead of like avoiding her fate, she's just embracing it. And where Violet pretty much just has to like remember what her dad told her and take his warning seriously, the main character in Dark City Omega has to unlearn everything she's been told, become empowered, and then like train with these powers she got less than a week ago so that she can save the world. And the through line on the Dark City Omega main character is much better. She doesn't like how betas are treated in the beginning when she was a beta. As an Omega, she still doesn't believe how betas are treated was just or right and thinks there should be better treatment and a better way for everyone. So narratively, her goal to save the world, to improve life for betas, and to have an overall more just and even society is established at the beginning of the story and becomes a strong through line and plot point throughout the entirety of the story. Where Violet doesn't seem to have any goals except to survive in the Fourth Wing and become a dragon rider. That's not even really a thing she wants. Like, part of the journey is her learning to want that thing. And I don't know that it successfully pulls that off. Now, I will say Xaden from Fourth Wing is less toxic than the love interest in Dark City Omega. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Xaden has no personality. Xaden doesn't talk, his actions speak louder than words, and he does treat Violet pretty decently most of the time and like is trying to save her life and stuff. Where arguably the protagonist in Dark City Omega is not trying to do the best thing for that girl. A lot of times he's trying to do what's best for him, what's best for his like relationship relationship with her, which like to me makes his toxic traits more easily identifiable and easier for us to hate him. But I don't necessarily think that Xaden is actually that much better. In fact, I think at the beginning of book 2, Violet and Xaden should have broken up, and I don't think that there's been anything that should have reconciled them. So like my feelings on where these relationships should be is both they shouldn't be together. And if we're talking about straight up uniqueness between the two, part of why it's easy to fall into Fourth Wing's world is because it's super like generic fantasy. It's very familiar with everything else I've ever read. You know, I'm engaged in the War College and I'm engaged in the dragons because those are two tropes that I like. But if you start to really look at it and pick things apart, none of it makes any fucking sense. Where for me, what's going on in Dark City Omegas is a lot more unusual. It's more innovative and interesting. They call this group of really powerful Omegas the Fates, and it takes them a long time to establish what the Fates are. So I actually think using a term that we're familiar with and making us think that maybe this is like a prophecy or a goddess or something for a long time and not knowing exactly what's going on is to this book's advantage. And then when we finally do learn about them, because so much stock has been put into their words and their powers and all that kind of stuff, we're more interested now than we otherwise would have been. And I do complain about like the alpha omega, what is or isn't natural, what the rules are, how much you can fight, how much you have to conform. That's not like well established. And like the boundaries of these powers is not super well established. But at least in Dark City Omega, that's kind of like part of the point. Like we don't really know how powerful these fates are. Like figuring that out is part of the point. And in Fourth Wing, the magic system is just unclear for plot convenience. We're not trying to figure anything out. We're not learning or solving. It's just vague intentionally so that it works in the plot. Another thing Fourth Wing had going for it that Dark City Omega didn't is that I listened to Fourth Wing where I read Dark City Omega, and it's much easier for me to sit and listen to repetitive writing than it is for me to read through it. Reading activates my technical writer brain, and because of that, I am a lot more critical in my feedback. And it's not necessarily that there aren't things I'm enjoying. It's that as a technical editor, my job is to point out everything that I have issue with, or that has a style issue, or that's flawed in some way, shape, or form. Basically everything we could polish. That job of an editor is to find all of those rough edges and recommend things to improve them. So yes, I didn't love Dark City Omega, and yes, for me, I found Fourth Wing a slightly more enjoyable read than Dark City Omega, and I found some of the relationship issues slightly less obviously problematic in Fourth Wing than they are in Dark City Omega, but I think overall quality-wise, they're about the same. And I think if you're into one, you're probably into the other and should give it a try. Now talking One Night, One Bite. I love the setup of this paranormal world where like this comet happened and now there's paranormals living in our society and we've had to learn to live alongside them and share space and all that good stuff. And truly, I think my main complaint is that One Night, One Bite is sort of set up as like a mafia romance, and I'm not into mafia romances. Once in a blue moon, I do read a mafia romance and enjoy it, but it's really hard because the men there are often abusive and controlling, and even in the romances, that's just who they are, how they're depicted, what that way of life is. And to that end, I think the main love interest in One Night, One Bite is less toxic and controlling than you see in a lot of these mafia romances. I think he is like on the lighter, fluffier end of that spectrum. And if we're talking about the female love interest in context of like a mafia romance, she's also on the lighter end of the spectrum. She's being mistreated by her ex-husband, but not physically abused. She is a little timid and mild, but still generally knows her value and worth and generally stands up for herself. Obviously, these are not aspirational relationships, so they don't have to portray like a healthy relationship or anything like that. It's part of why I end up giving them 3 stars instead of 2 or 1 stars, because they're not super unhealthy relationships and they're not preaching to a vulnerable audience. They're also not for me though. And that's probably part of why I'm so critical of them, is they're doing things that I don't like. But I want you guys to know I see the appeal. If you're into them, I'm there for you. I see redeeming qualities and values and why someone might like either of these stories. And I even see why you would rate them higher than some things that I've rated very highly and enjoyed this year. As of recording, it is October the 10th, and I have finished Cold Hearted by Heather Guerre. I loved it. I think it was right on point with those Kate Sewell rejected mate vibes. I thought there was a good balance in what the characters were dealing with, had to overcome, and like could all be solved by communication potentially. Yeah? Yeah. You're too big. Girlfriend. What are we doing? Yeah? Are you gonna get down? Good girl. I don't know what it is about werewolves, but it is always the right vibe for me. I loved the whole pack concept. We didn't do a traditional Alpha Omega verse, but we did do a great like found family element. I love setting it in Alaska where it's a little bit more remote. I like that our main love interest was human and remained human. I liked this take on vampires. Of course, I liked it so much that that makes it hard for me to move on to the next book, which is supposed to be a vampire romance. And to be honest with you guys, I only plan to read 3 books for this Love of the Night readathon, but I've decided that I'm having so much fun, I'm going to keep it going with some werewolf vibes. And I've gone back to a series where I read a middle book, Rabid, by Raven Kennedy and Ivy Asher, and I'm going to read the first book in that series and troll my way through for the rest of the week. I will update you guys as that continues, but I probably won't be doing any direct like sitting and reading vlogs going forward, just because it's like a little bit hard to set up, and to be honest, I have like a lot of film editing I have to do at this juncture, so I'll probably be sort of listening while editing. I'm filming this wrap up here on October the 15th, but the Love in the Night Paranormal Readathon officially ended on the 13th or the 12th, I believe. And during this time, I read 2 whole books, plus a half of a third, a first chapter of a new start, and then about halfway through one more. So let's just briefly tackle those. As I told you guys last time, I started off with Wild Moon by C.R. Jane and Mila Young. It's the first book in the Kingdom of Wolf series that has a whole bunch of different authors. Honestly, I didn't enjoy this book, and it doesn't really seem to relate to Rabid by Raven Kennedy and Ivy Asher. This first book left me on a cliffhanger, and I really wanted to know what would happen to the abusive, rejected me. I continued into the second book, and I still didn't really get that satisfactory conclusion and started into the third book, but then they introduced Fae into what had been like just werewolves with a couple of vampires, and I was all the way out. They just hadn't done a good enough job like characterizing these different paranormal beings or why we needed so many. It felt really plot convenient, and it also felt like this story didn't know what it wanted to be. Like, our main character is going through some heavy and intense abuse at the hands of her ex. She has a ton of healing she needs to do, but at the same time she's just like, oh, such a quirky girl, and things are just kind of like happening, and oh my goodness, good luck, bad luck, who knows, it's just all going on for her. And what's good luck, bad luck is a series of murders happening in the cozy town we're in. I really hated it. It's way too convenient, random McRanderson. The writing style is 100% not for me. I wish I were stronger and had DNF'd the first book from the start and hadn't like been trolled into reading the second and the third book here. I do still think The Kingdom of Wolves might be something I circle back to later, because these 2 authors, like, they founded the idea, but this book doesn't feel related at all to Rabid, and I'm a little bit curious to see what other offerings in this series might have. So that quickly had me jumping into random free books I collected because I didn't want to get caught into a reading slump, and I started with Halloween Werewolf by Kestra, Pingree. Obviously I'm reading this because I'm still looking for that werewolf shifter feel, and it's a Halloween book in October. Why would I not pick it up? I got through the first chapter before putting this one down. The writing style is terrible in this. It uses 5 words when 2 would have done it. There's a lot of adverbs. You're thrown right into the middle of something that you don't understand and have no context for. And at the same time, there's not enough characterization there for me to like engage honestly with it. It was the last night of the readathon, but I wasn't willing to give up. So I moved on into Subversion by Allyson, Lindt. I'm about halfway through this one, and I am definitely going to finish it. I'm really loving it. This one also has a little bit of a writing style issue in the first chapter, but unlike Halloween Werewolf, where there was nothing like engaging going on, I was kind of interested in our main character character. I was sort of interested in the world they were presenting. The further in we got, the more different like hooks and appeals the story made. So far this is a very sex positive book. This is a book with empowered characters becoming more empowered. They're talking about feelings and emotions and different relationships between different characters. It does kind of feel like there's probably a series before this one, and I am mildly worried because I got this book for free on one of those event days, and I don't think the rest of the series is available via Kindle Unlimited, and it's quite possible this one will leave me in a cliffhanger, but I'll worry about that when I finish it off. So overall, during this past week, I read 5 full books, half of a third book, a first chapter of another book, and then half of another book. So I would say that it is a very successful paranormal romance readathon, and it was a great little like relief from reading these horror scary books. I'm actually gonna go back to reading through the Rewind or Die series at this point, and I'm gonna try and get as far as I can in the month of October. So I think like this little week of romance is a perfect balance between all the like horror scary stuff I'm doing afterwards. And if you guys were looking for other paranormal reads to add to your TBR, I would recommend you look at the other booktubers who participated in the Love and Night Paranormal Readathon. Obviously there's Heather over at Hia Booktubes, Shay Geeks Out, Izzy from Happy For Now, Paperback and Planners, and unofficially I believe there's Meowth Vader, who usually helps organize things behind the scenes and is often present in all of the lives. Let me know in those comments down below if you've got a paranormal romance I should be picking up. And as always, keep reading.